One. Good morning. We're live for episode 154 of Trek Live. How you doing this morning, Dan?
Doing great. I'm excited to. This is the first fantasy draft that we've done that we are doing in the new year. So I'm excited for it.
Yeah, me too. This is an exciting kind of break from what we've done to this point. We've done, I want to say, 5 fantasy drafts so far, and they've all been specific to a show, like a season of a show. And we did the movies as well. You'll find, like, I think we did TNG season 3, we did Voyager season 5, TOS season 2, DS9 season 1, and the movies. So this is kind of a break from that. And we're going to look at the 29 episodes. And somebody can correct me if I'm missing one. If we slipped on any, I think we're good though.
Did I miss one?
29. Did you? No, I don't think so.
Keep going. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. 20. I believe there are 29 2-part episodes. That have the part 1 and part 2 as part of their title. There are lots of other examples of sort of arc-based episodes that might not have that, but are clearly a part 1, part 2. For the purposes of this draft, we're leaving those out. These are strictly the episodes that have the labeled part 1 and part 2 that we're kind of limiting ourselves to here. So that gives us examples from across the spectrum. We have TOS all the way through Picard represented on our draft board, and quite a few examples of a lot of those middle shows. I think 3 Discoveries, handful of Enterprise. So all the shows are here, and it'll be interesting to not just look at like, well, which TNG 2-parter do you like the most? It's like put them all into a big pot and have to choose among all the options. It should be a different kind of thing.
Yeah. So this is going to be a big kind of change because, in the past, like you said, we've done episodes where it was specific to a show. We were in TNG, we were in the movies kind of, and so I think this should be fun.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think this opens up a lot of doors. We could do, the cool thing about this idea, I think, with fantasy drafts of episodes is that you can construct it any way you want. You can
big time
put any kind of pool of episodes into whatever list you want and run from that. It can be season finales across all the shows, like every season finale. You could it's just endless. The number
like it's just you could do anything.
Yeah, you can go with like keep it specific to a show. You can do data episodes. We just did Data Spotlight last week. You could look at the TNG episode guide and find all the episodes that really center on data and put them on draft board and have to do this.
Yeah.
So there are all kinds of ways I think we can have fun with this, and I'm sure we will. And this is our sort of first break from tradition with the season looks. So we're going to go 10 rounds. There are 29 to choose from, so that kind of pretty closely breaks this into thirds. We'll each end up with 10. We'll have 9 left undrafted, which will be interesting to look at. Which ones got left behind. Should be interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Before we get into that, Bill, update us on your rewatch. Or your
so rewatch, right now, I am about, I want to say, am I a little more than a third, I guess, through season 2 of Deep Space Nine, season 7 of TNG. I just watched my last episodes for each were Second Sight from Deep Space Nine, which is not a favorite of mine. I did see some mixed reactions on Twitter when I tweeted about it. The episode got some love, which always happens.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very rare especially if I ask a question or relate to an episode. There's always going to be some mixed responses. There's going to be people who like it. There's going to be people who don't.
Yeah.
There were some. I can't remember exactly who it was. Maybe it was AKA Mabel, who was in the room on Periscope at least, who threw the episode a little bit of love. And I'm not in love with it. I have a hard time with the kind of lackadaisical, kind of slow plotting rhythm of it. It's less well-paced than many other examples of Trek.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing we talked about a couple of weeks ago when we did the season 2 recap was that this is an episode that does, I give it credit for allowing the audience to be reminded that Benjamin Sisko is a widower and single dad, and that he has some unique character traits that over the course of the show when they're telling their stories and dealing with their crisis of the week, it's kind of easy to lose sight of. So I appreciate that the show took the time to tell a story, produce an episode that leans into that aspect of Sisko's character, which is unique to him. It makes him, his own character and something different than we've had before in Trek.
Yeah.
So it does keep that ball in the air, which I appreciate, and I think other episodes will as well in the future. This is sort of season 2's example of allowing that to stay alive.
Mm-hmm.
But I wish the episode was stronger for myself.
Yeah.
Not my favorite. And then for TNG, the last one I watched was Inheritance, which is the female scientist who claims to be Dr. Soong's ex-wife, Data's mother, with the twist involved about her identity and where she comes from.
Yeah.
Which I think adds some credence to a lot of the stuff in Picard. One of the things that I don't want to say I threw shade at Picard, but one of the things I had the hardest time kind of embracing was this idea that Dr. Soong has this brother out there in the far reaches of space who's also doing artificial intelligence work, somebody we hadn't really heard of. No real indication that there was more going on there and that there were more people involved, and this kind of late revelation. But this episode, I think, adds credence to that. Data doesn't know that there's this woman who existed that had a romantic relationship with Soong and worked with him and can claim to be sort of Data's mother. And there's it adds to the credence that there is more than meets the eye with Dr. Soong, and there are more people that were involved in this project, and that it wasn't just a single old guy
tinkering on stuff
doing it. There's more to it. So it's an episode that I haven't ever I can't say that I loved, but I've always respected and liked. I think Brent Spiner's really good at it. The guest star, Flanagan, is really, really a good character actress, and she's excellent in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with Picard, it's another example of an episode that I think is kind of improved with time with the additional context that we've gotten in.
Yeah, it's very true.
Shows introduced since. Yeah.
My rewatch.
Cool. What about you? Yeah.
I believe the last one I talked about was Destiny, maybe, which I was on. The next run of episodes that I went through is Prophet, Motive, Visionary, Distant Voices, Through the Looking Glass, and Improbable Cause. Good run of episodes, I think, in there. But Deep Space Nine is at the point where it's starting to kind of heat up. So I'm really enjoying it. So.
Yeah, season 3 it gets really strong. I think that Improbable Cause, Dies Cast, two-parter is sort of the pivot point where I think a lot of people credit the show with finding its sea legs and really becoming Deep Space Nine proper.
Yeah.
When Sisko shaves his head at the beginning of season 4 and you get Worf and the Klingon stuff. But I think it's that. I think it's Improbable Cause and Dies Cast, the way it deals with the Dominion and the big political situation across the quadrant, across that half of the galaxy with the Romulans and the Cardassians, and everybody's kind of involved and everybody has stake in the game. I think that's where Deep Space Nine really starts to embrace the fact that it's the only show that takes place in that part of the galaxy. You have Voyager all the way out in the Delta Quadrant, TNG's off the air, so Deep Space Nine kind of has the lay of the land. They can kind of do what they want and swing the fences in terms of what's going on in the universe, and they start to take advantage of that freedom in that two-part, which sets up a lot of what's coming down the road.
They really build off what they've already built before. I feel like they don't really rely on other things from other shows or other ideas. This kind of kickstart to the end of season 3, season 4 is really kind of them building off what they've kind of already done in the past couple seasons. So I really enjoy it. Yeah,
you're into good stuff, and you're getting towards the end. You only have maybe 6 episodes left or so, maybe 5, something like that.
Yeah.
So we'll be doing maybe a DS9 season 3.
Yeah, see it or skip it.
Recap.
Yeah, pretty soon.
See it, skip it.
Yeah.
that I'll be kind of eager to look at for sure to talk about all these episodes.
Mm-hmm.
But with that, I think we should transition right into this proceeding that we're getting off on today, the fantasy draft of 2-part episodes. So I'm going to go ahead on my end and put on, if you're watching us on Periscope or YouTube, hopefully in a second here you'll be able to see our draft board with the list of options that we have at our disposal. Each 2-parter. Again, this does not include 2-part episodes. You got 29.
Yeah. Okay.
This does not include 2-part episodes that don't have part 1 and part 2 as part of their cut. So there's that. The one huge, and I'm sure we'll end up talking about it, curveball in here that Discovery threw us this year is That Hope Is You, which is part 1 at the premiere and part 2 at the finale. That is an unconventional option here.
That's not your run-of-the-mill 2-parter, right? It's a little bit different.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see how that gets, if that gets chosen, and if it doesn't, and if maybe that's why that it's not as clean cut a 2-parter as all of these other part 1, part 2 stories are. There are also 2 of these for those who look at these episodes in all kinds of different ways. There's all kinds of almost like religion, like ways of kind of how many episodes are there, how do you count them. There are 2 Voyager episodes here, Dark Frontier and Flesh and Blood, which were aired as a 2-hour like TV movie, but they were produced as 2 separate episodes. The part 1 and part 2 have different directors, they have different production numbers. They were sort of spliced together to air as a 2-hour movie. So for this purpose, I put them here. They're going to count, so they are options. But you could make a case. I think Jim Morehouse from Trek Ranks with his spreadsheet might not count them. He might have 27 on his board as a 2-hour movie. But I would argue with him on that. That would be an interesting debate to have.
Yeah.
So we do have to decide who's going to go first. How are we going to do that? Do we? I can flip a coin on my phone.
Okay. Cool.
I'm going to do an online. We always do this, and don't decide beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
Flip a coin.
Yeah.
So.
As Bill gets that ready, I would love to see your guys' list if you're watching this live or after the fact. If you're listening on the podcast, definitely come over to Twitter or the Discord server, post your guys' draft board, and so we could see what you guys would pick. Because I think the fun thing with both Bill and I, we're going to be able to pick different episodes and see how that kind of plays out. But also, I'm curious to see where these 2-parters land on your guys' draft board, because I think this is kind of a way to see kind of what people think as far as like their top 5 or top 10 2-parter episodes. It's kind of a sneaky way to kind of find that out. Besides, I mean, you can't really do that with Bill and I, because we're going to be picking each other's different episodes because just the way the draft works. But
right.
Again, I'm really excited to see your guys' your picks as well.
Yeah, the whole point is definitely to kind of structure ourselves into looking at our preferences, basically, and the fantasy draft element adds that competitive element. But at the end of the day, we're just interested in hearing like which ones do you love. So if you're in the chat and you have a top 10 list, a top 5 list, whatever you want to share, we would love to hear it. AKA Mamel's in the room and mentions that she thinks she has a pretty nice mix of all the shows, which is what I love. I love to see that. And I do have my coin flipper ready to go, so I'm going to let you call it. And
cool.
What do you got?
Tails.
You're going to call Tails?
Yes.
It is Tails.
Yes.
So you have won the toss, and you're going to be up first.
Okay, with my first pick in the 2-part episode fantasy draft will be, let's see if I can do this. Oh, no, not yet. Year of Hell from Voyager.
Year of Hell. Nice.
Yes. I really do love this episode. Maybe could have let it slide a couple rounds, but when in the past I feel like I've been a type of, not a team, but a person that drafts or takes an episode because I really just like it, and I try not to let other people's opinions, because I think maybe it's just my preference, I guess. I think maybe
Yeah, you gotta go with what you love.
Yeah, Bill goes with maybe a different episode or episodes here on the first round, but it's my preference. I'm a big Voyager guy. I really do love this episode, and I couldn't let it go.
Yeah, I think that's probably at the end of the day the best way to go. Just kind of trust your instincts and pick what you genuinely want, like what you want to survive. You don't want to necessarily play too much Russian roulette with letting things slip through and figuring, I'll get that in the third or fourth round.
Yeah.
Because you never know. I mean, I for quick bit of housekeeping, I didn't do a ton of like preparation for this.
Okay.
Just as I'm looking at it right here, I have some like rankings in my head that are like pre-programmed from times past, but I'm trying not to do too much advanced homework. I'm just going to kind of let my instincts guide me through this. So you never know. I mean, I could have taken Year of Hell pretty early here. Okay. Definitely a cool pick, and very much a you pick.
Good.
Makes perfect sense for you. I'm going to go with the boring standard, get it off the board, Best of Both Worlds for TNG.
Okay.
As my first choice. It's as standard issue and safe as it gets, but I do genuinely think it's my favorite of these options. I think the iconic cliffhanger and the balancing act it has of being action and adventure with the Borg and all the big science fiction stuff that comes from that, and also being about something as simple as Riker's career, and do you want to be what do you want to do, what do you feel most comfortable doing, what makes you happy, as opposed to sort of what conventional wisdom and what kind of peer pressure and what your cohorts think you should be doing. Should you be the captain because that's what looks good on paper, or should you be the first officer of the Enterprise because that's what actually genuinely makes you happy?
Yeah,
I love the fact that it can do both those things. It can walk and chew gum at the same time, and do both extraordinarily well. So that's my first round pick.
Cool. Yeah, it's a great pick. I definitely knew that was going to go maybe in the first two rounds. It's just definitely a classic. Oh, yeah. So, all right. My next pick might be a little bit unconventional, but I think the recency of just watching it, I think just plays right into my hands, I guess, as far as loving this episode. But I'm going to go with Deep Space Nine's Past Tense as my next two-parter pick. I had just hit this on my rewatch. It kind of really worked out. I had finished kind of all the two-parters I had seen. This was probably the last one to see before this, so it works out perfectly. I really do love this episode. This, really good.
It is.
It feels really big too, but I think there's some simple elements of just the trio, kind of a little bit, and then a lot of these maybe it would be fun to see how many like are about time travel and things like that, but this one it just has it all, so had to take it.
Yeah, Past Tense is a great choice. There's a lot of there's a recency element there for sure with you that it's really fresh in your mind. You just watched it. You kind of rediscovered it. I think I remember talking about you didn't have a ton of memory going into it with what it was going to do, what it was going to be about. Yeah. So that had to help as well. And it's a classic. It's stood the test of time. It's about big things and things that are just as relevant today in 2021 as they were being discussed in 1995 or whatever when it came out.
Yeah.
So it's a great one, and it would have been high up on my list. I would have gotten it pretty soon here, I think, if you didn't do that. So I'm going to go with a Voyager choice and kind of pair it with the Best of Both Worlds, and go with Scorpion.
Oh, I knew it.
Yeah.
I was gonna try to see if I could let it slide one more round, but I knew you'd take it.
Yeah, it's pretty high on my favorites list of all Star Trek. Obviously it introduces a huge component of what I think makes Voyager a great show with 7 of 9. Really shoots a breath of fresh air into the show and ups the stakes with kind of beginning this process of having to deal with the Borg, which some people think was a mixed bag as far as how Voyager handled the Borg overall.
Yeah.
But it's full of promise and full of excitement and full of big ideas with Scorpion, I think, at the beginning. And Species 8472, so all kinds of ambitious visual stuff going on there with unconventional alien species and great score and great cliffhanger. Janeway, doing something really gutsy, and I think sets her apart to make that decision to try to negotiate with the Borg and try to do a deal with the devil. Really, really great stuff. Definitely been a long time big favorite of mine.
Yeah, that episode does feel really big. Like I feel like if Voyager were to have a movie, like this would be it. It's a big kind of actiony, really sci-fi, great 2-parter.
Yeah, for sure. Agreed. Real quick, before we start round 3, a little bit of a chat update in the Periscope here. We have A.K. Mamel and Fitzy, Calherb, Jeff in the room. A lot of respect for all of our picks. Sierfell's getting love. Best of Both Worlds.
Cool.
Noted as a favorite.
Nice.
Can never go wrong with Borg. Scorpion is Jeff's favorite Voyager 2-parter, top 3 Voyager episode for him. So a lot of love, a lot of respect in the chat. 2 rounds in, so we'll see. I mean, the always with these things, especially when we go as deep as 10 rounds. I think the first handful of rounds are not autopilot, but it's kind of shooting fish in a barrel with great episodes.
Predictable, yeah.
But once you're getting like the real classics off the bat, and once you're through like the no-brainers, going off of conventional wisdom, it's interesting. I think those last handful of rounds are where it gets we really get into like personal preferences and what
big time,
what we kind of find ourselves gravitating towards. So,
okay, for my third or fourth round, I think. Yeah, third round. I am gonna go with the TNG 2-parter, Chain of Command.
Yeah, one of my favorites for sure.
This is a great episode. I don't know if it has the rewatchability of maybe some of these other ones, but it is so good. Picard's got some great stuff in it. 4 lights thing always or 3 lights or whatever. It gets cited as maybe the most memorable thing in that. But there's also some just other stuff that's so good in this. I think I really like this, and I had to take it. So
yeah, Chain of Command's it's another one that I think balances really well. It's got the part 2 is really heavy with the Patrick Stewart, David Warner, 2-hander, torture sequence stuff, Gulbin Jarid and Picard.
Yeah.
But I think equally really interesting, compelling is Captain Jellicoe, seeing a fresh face and a new approach that kind of doesn't go down easy. I think that's a common thing that a lot of people can relate to when you have a change at the top and somebody comes in and just kind of wants to shake things up and is not interested in kind of just keeping the status quo and doing it the way the old guy did it.
Yeah. I
think that's something that a lot of people experience in their own workplaces, and Star Trek finds a way to explore that in a way that is real, relatable, incredible in the Star Trek universe, basically. And I think it's got some of Frakes' best stuff too. When he gets relieved, and Jellicoe has to come ask him pilot the shuttle in this dangerous mission, and they both kind of let each other have it and give each other honest assessments of each other. It's a real highlight for me. That's one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah.
And The Next Generation, especially for Riker. So, huge fan of Chain of Command, and definitely would have been a high pick. So,
yeah.
For me, getting into the lots of different really good options here. I'm going to go with classic TOS and go with the Menagerie.
Okay.
I think that sits pretty high up on my favorites list as well. That is a groundbreaking piece of Star Trek for sure. I think the production challenge of finding a way to kind of take advantage of this unaired pilot and make it fit into the continuity of the show. I think it's sort of like the first step for Star Trek to kind of establish itself as this thing with history and lineage and things that came before, and characters served on other ships, and there were other people who were on these ships in years past. I think that's a huge hallmark of Star Trek. One of the big calling cards of it is it's this thing with running history and things you can pop in and out of, and the Menagerie is sort of the introduction of that being a real thing that Star Trek concerns itself with. And I think the cage is really, really strong. So the footage that they're using is good and really compelling, dramatic stuff. Pike and Vina, and then of course with Discovery later on. If you're a fan of Discovery season 2, it just I think even further enhances all of that stuff with Spock's choice to kind of throw it all away to save Pike and to give Pike this thing that he knows Pike would want. That isn't conventionally possible because of Talos 4 being this banned planet that nobody can go to. I think in season 2 of Discovery, we see enough of why Spock would be so loyal to Pike to kind of throw it all away. There's a real bond there. So on its own, it's great, and I think in the history of Star Trek, it's kind of unmatched in its significance with establishing that it's going to have continuity and history and all that good stuff.
I would definitely agree that Menagerie is very, it's like upper echelon as far as two-parters go, but I think if we're talking about like draft stock rising, this episode in particular is definitely rising just because of, like you said, season 2 of Discovery and how it changes that whole thing. So definitely rising for sure.
Yeah, I think so. I think going back to it and further exploring those characters only enhances it for sure.
All right.
Yeah. What do you got round 4?
My round 4 pick will be another Voyager.
Okay.
It will be Equinox.
Okay.
I think this is underrated two-parter. I think it really plays with something that probably every viewer and probably this crew has thought, you know what, if we didn't stick to our Starfleet and Federation ideals, what would happen? We kind of get this mirror to be able to see and reflect on that. There's also some really good character stuff in that, so I had to pick it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Equinox, like you said, really takes advantage of Voyager's premise.
Yeah.
The different points along the way when, particularly, I think the Maquis crew, especially early on, would question Janeway on being so beholden to Starfleet principles. Do they really work out here? Should we really be leaning so heavily into these things that work really well in the Alpha Quadrant when you have a fleet and you have resources and all these things backing you up? So we throw them away. I think Equinox sort of poses that question in a real way and forces them to look in the mirror and validate that choice that Janeway made. You got some really good guest characters there with Captain Ransom. Some cool ethical questions that are asked about animal rights and Devil in the Dark style exploration of alien, other entities that are not easily understood. Exploitation. Yes. Really, really great Star Trek stuff loaded in that episode. Janeway gets pushed to the brink, and I think the divisive element in this episode is probably that stuff. Some people might think Janeway goes too far, or maybe gets a little out of character. I don't at all. I think the personal nature of how she kind of feels this in her bones and is so offended by what Ransom's doing makes perfect sense. And I like the juxtaposition of Chakotay, the Maquis, runaway from Starfleet, being the one that sort of has to try to
pull her back.
Yes, is a really cool choice. And, it just feels real. It feels dramatically satisfying, incredible, and I love it. Equinox would be high on my list too. That might have been the next one I picked. So, looking at this, there are a lot of good choices, but I'm kind of through the no-brainer ones here.
You are.
I'm gonna
definitely are.
Yeah. I'm gonna go with one that I'm pretty confident you would not choose, but I love, and that is Inamir Darkly from Enterprise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's I think my favorite of what's left, if I'm being honest. I love Inamir Darkly. I like the complete commitment to insanity. We talked about that with an episode recently, just kind of committing to it and rolling with the absurdity of everything. And the way that Inamir Darkly just throws itself into the mirror universe without even throwing a tie back to the prime timeline and our traditional characters. It was a really ambitious choice. It was a controversial choice because so few episodes left in Enterprise. There was a lot of question about, do we really need to spend time away from our characters and do all that? But one of the things that Inamir Darkly does through the nature of its plot, because we're on the Defiant, which is from the 23rd century, thrown back in time, is Mirror Archer has access to what our Captain Archer ultimately became. And that is a huge part of pressuring him into what he's trying to do. He has to match Federation president, legendary historical figure, George Washington of the Federation, Jonathan Archer, basically. And that, I think, does inform some things about things we're not going to see in Enterprise, knowing that the show's ending early. We're not going to see Archer fulfill necessarily that full arc. So, in a weird way, Inamir Darkly does kind of inform us of some of the things that Jonathan Archer will do and how he's going to be viewed in the history books and how he accomplishes, many, many things. And I think it has fun with the Mirror Universe. I think Deep Space Nine fell into a trap of some pretty rough episodes in the Mirror Universe and maybe losing sight of what made it great, what made it cool in Mirror. And I think Inamir Darkly takes a completely different approach and kind of just embraces the insanity of it, the absurdity of it, the silliness of it, and leans into those aspects and has fun as opposed to really dark, grimy, sometimes even campy elements that you do get in Deep Space Nine. There's some elements of camp in Inamir Darkly too as well, but I think it's just toned significantly better than what Deep Space Nine ended up doing on its repeat visits to the Mirror Universe.
Yeah, I think it really knows what it is, and it doesn't try to be really anything else, which I can appreciate it. You guys know that I'm not a big Mirror Universe fan, but I can definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, and they rebuilt the Enterprise, like all those sets being kind of like, and Discovery, they took the different approach of kind of, breathing new life and reimagining some of those sets and, honoring the lineage of it and recreating, but really not being afraid to juice them up with modern production values. And I think Inamir Darkly was sort of maybe the end point of being able to just kind of reproduce and and do the old sets. That's the last time we're going to see those sets built that way. And there's a definite nostalgic factor to seeing those Enterprise characters walking around the classic TOS sets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So round 5. We do have real quick, actually, in the chat, just some love for Inamir Darkly. A lot of Fitz Calher loves Equinox. Great pick, he says. AKA Mamel loves Inamir Darkly. So we're getting some backup here.
That's good.
We're not getting raked over the coals yet with any controversial choices.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you got?
My round 5 pick will be another TNG two-parter. I talked about Rising Stock in Bill's Menagerie pick. I think Unification. I'm picking Unification. Definitely is a rising stock as far as where Picard went with that show. I think it's definitely a fun exploration of the dynamic of between Romulans and Vulcans, and I know Spock was in this episode, but I think more than that, I like the exploration of their dynamic and their relationship, and this kind of sets the groundwork kind of for more things to come, not just with, obviously, it's the two worlds kind of trying to come together, but also where Picard goes as a character as well. So I couldn't leave it off the list any longer.
Yeah, Unification's great. I think it has aged well, and there are some really great. It's another one that I think balances pretty well. It's got these big, huge ideas with the Vulcans and the Romulans reunifying and working together. Elements of both societies working together to reunify, and what that means to the Federation in theory, and what that would mean to the Romulans, and you have Sela coming back and being a part of it. But I think those are big picture things, but it's simple scenes like Picard's last meeting with Sarek, when Sarek is fading, is one of my favorite scenes in all of Star Trek.
Yeah.
Just tremendous performances on both those actors' parts, with Sarek sort of slipping in and out of hanging in that conversation, and Picard kind of just rolling with the punches and getting the information he needs, but being respectful at every step along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've talked to you, I think, about I can't remember, I think it was last week, we talked to Data having that scene with Spock on the Bird Prey, talking about, their kind of similar yet opposite journeys with reckoning with humanity and what they both want, and how they are very much opposites, but dealing with similar struggles as well with identity and finding comfort in their own skin, so to speak. So there are these small moments that are really sprinkled in it that I love. Some of my favorite little moments with characters.
Yeah, which is I feel like, not to stay on Data a little bit longer, just because we had a whole episode last week on that character, but I think that those two characters get lumped together as kind of the same type of character, but I think they are similar in a lot of ways, but also different in that way. So
yeah, no, I agree. All true.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to double back to TNG. I think I'm going to go with Redemption, which is big Klingon Civil War story, a lot of heavy Worf stuff, Kern, Gowron, big heavy factors in these two episodes. The Duras sisters, some really classic, big, almost like Shakespearean quality characters that are at the head of the Klingon government, basically vying for power, and the ripples that that's sending through the rest of the quadrant. Klingon, with the Romulans kind of getting their fingers in it and trying to manipulate the situation, and the Federation trying to piece it all together and figure out what the heck's going on. Strong Michael Dorn stuff, some really good Patrick Stewart stuff in there too. I think it's TNG playing with as wide a canvas, and kind of like we were just talking about in the rewatch recap, with Deep Space Nine kind of committing to not being afraid of shaking up the dynamic and really playing with their, complete autonomy in the Alpha Quadrant, basically not having TNG anymore and doing some big things. Redemption feels like TNG not being afraid to do big things, like not being afraid to almost get into serialization a little bit. It's not traditional serialization. It's not something that hangs and is something that lingers the way like the Xindi arc does in season 3 of Enterprise, for example. But they're starting things that are going to ultimately need to be paid off, or are things that are going to potentially linger and create opportunities down the road, not clean, beginning, middle, and an end things. And Redemption pays off things that came earlier with Worf, giving up his honor and sins of the father, like there are resolutions there. So it's an example of Star Trek also starting to get comfortable with the idea of some serialization as well. So.
Yeah, all good stuff. It does feel really big. I'll definitely give you that. It's but it's also got some great Klingon stuff, which I love. Which I think I maybe made his mistake. Maybe I didn't. You guys know that I'm big on Klingon stuff, so.
You do love the Klingons.
Yeah.
It's got Data in command of a ship.
Oh yeah.
And
It's got
really
good stuff.
good stuff in part 2 with that. Yeah, I think that's good. It pays off yesterday's Enterprise too. The introduction to Sela, there's a big scene, Picard and her talking about the kind of the unknowingness of what happened in yesterday's Enterprise. Like, totally understand it. And so a lot of serialization going. Redemption. We're into the second half now.
Yeah, we're in that second half where I think the episodes definitely fall off. Definitely, I think there's some unpredictability here where I don't know where Bill's gonna go. He probably doesn't know where. I mean, he probably could guess because my next pick is a Voyager pick, and it's going to be Basics.
Basics, okay.
Yeah, I like. I think we've all thought of like them like losing the ship. Kind of from the very beginning, and I think that's cool that they kind of explore that here. I think their ideals are definitely put to the test. Do they stay there? Do they try to get the ship back? What happens? Some stuff on the ship. There's some good stuff, on the ship. Yeah, all good stuff. I think for Voyager 2-parter for sure.
Yeah, I think the title kind of tells you everything. It's forcing the characters to kind of be stripped of their technology and having to go back to the basics, and it's them kind of operating as a crew with no technology and no, have to lean on all their most basic skill sets to survive and to live to fight another day. Yeah. And there's definitely some big action. I'm not a huge fan of the Kazon. They've kind of graded on me by that point, but they do take advantage of they feel powerful in that episode. Like, they do feel like Voyager's outnumbered. Voyager is reaping the consequences of kind of allowing that Kazon situation to kind of spiral out of control for the course of the last 2 years. And Seska's kind of done enough damage at this point to be able to do what she does and take Voyager. It feels like that was building to that point all season. If you watch season 2 of Voyager, I'm watching the Delta Flyers podcast, and they're going through season 2 of Voyager right now. Just hearing them recap the episodes and talk about them, you really do feel that momentum being pulled from pretty early in the season. That Seska is constantly working in the background to do this. This is what Seska has been wanting all along, and I love that. I love the build up to it, and Chakotay's got some really good stuff in it with having this personal vendetta kind of burning inside of him against Seska. And wanting to go off on his own, but the crew not letting him just make a one-man thing, and wanting to back him up. I think there's some really good stuff there. So yeah, but I think Basics is really strong. I think it's an underrated 2-parter that I always enjoy. Yeah, I'm gonna go with. Now we're into the batch of episodes that some of these, maybe I love part 1, or I really like part 2, but maybe I'm not as high on part 1. And there's some that I wouldn't necessarily give like an A or an A- to, or to kind of B+ kinds of episodes. So it's like, do I pick the one that I'm looking at one right now that I love part 1, love it, but I'm not nearly as high on part 2. Or do I go with one that maybe doesn't quite reach the heights of a really high part 1, but doesn't have the dip in enjoyment part 2? And I'm going to go with the Voyager. I'm going to go with Future's End, which I really like. It's a fun time. I wouldn't say it's my favorite. I wouldn't say it's my classic go-to, but it's certainly got a lot of levity and some good guest stars with Sarah Silverman and Ed Bagley Jr. Really committing to the time travel, Sitting on the Edge of Forever kinds of references with Tuvok and the Hat. There are some lines of dialogue that definitely harken back to the original series, so they're really embracing sort of Star Trek stuff there. Very 90s as well. I feel like
very
that's
90s.
Sometimes the TOS episodes get a lot of flack for being, oh my gosh, it's so 60s. That's an example of maybe Voyager especially feeling as 90s as it gets.
Yeah.
So if you want a flavor of what 1996 felt like, Future's End's a great place to go.
Yeah.
But I always enjoy Future's End. I think it's a lot of fun.
I think there's some good, like, you mentioned like TOS stuff with City on the Edge, but there's also some good TNG movies with kind of the Voyage Home kind of style as well, going back to the future or the past, I guess. Sorry, and there's some good humorous moments in there too. But I really do like it. I think Voyager maybe at the end maybe goes back to the time travel thing a little bit too much, but what show doesn't? So I think it's a good pick.
For sure. Yeah, I agree. It's fun. I just that's the word that always comes to mind with Future's End is it's just flat out a good time. Mm-hmm. It's a romp. It's not the heaviest thing. It doesn't have the dramatic weight of Chain of Command. It doesn't have the big universe implications that something like Unification or Redemption have, or even like Scorpion has, but it never loses its sight on having a good time, just being an entertaining romp.
Yeah.
Round 7.
Oh man, this is getting very tough. Very, very tough. I'm gonna go. I feel like I have all Voyager, but I'm gonna go another Voyager. I'm gonna try to stick to my guns here. I'm going to go with Workforce.
Oh, that was going to be my next one. I was almost regretting not doing it.
Yeah, I think this is an underrated episode. You guys know that I'm not a big proponent for when a show isn't about the actual crew itself. Like that's why I'm not big on a few other Voyager episodes that I will not name. And even with the Mirror Universe stuff, it's not technically our crew. So, but this is a great episode because I think even when they like lose all their memory, kind of with basics, like they lose everything, they're kind of still true to themselves. Like, so I think this is just a fun kind of rebellious kind of crew moment fighting against an entity that's. And the kind of the setup of this whole show or this whole episode, it is kind of a big sci-fi concept, which is to me is Voyager in a nutshell as well. I really do like. I think Workforce is definitely an underrated episode.
And I like Workforce a lot too. Yeah. Good. Sorry.
I have 4 Voyager picks, if that tells you anything. But yeah.
It tells me a lot for sure. But Voyager gets a lot of credit for its two-parters. I think what I'm looking at here, a lot of what's the ones that stand out to me the most that are left are the Voyager ones. To be honest with you, I think their two-parters are pretty uniformly strong. So yeah, I think Workforce is a really cool premise. I like the way that again kind of on the very much in a different way than Basics. It strips the characters down to the basics. I mean, it's not our crew. They're not operating in the way that they usually do. They don't have the memory, but they still, you get to see these situations where they're kind of drawn to each other still. And I think there's some really nice moments in those scenes. I'm always surprised when I hit Workforce again. It's not one that I remember like that comes to the front of my mind when I'm thinking about these kinds of episodes, favorite episodes. But when I hit it in my rewatches, I give it a fresh set of eyes. It always surprises me. Like, wow, this is actually really good.
Yeah.
Better than I give it credit for. A lot of really good Doctor stuff too with ECH. Like hiding in a nebula on the ship and by himself. Really enjoy that too.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with another Voyager. We're kind of taking Voyager's stuff off the table here. I'm gonna go with Dark Frontier, which is a big 7 of 9 set piece for sure. It's another big Borg. I have a lot of Borg stuff. I have Best of World, Scorpion, now Dark Frontier. So maybe that says something about me too. I really enjoy the deep dive in 7 of 9's background, her where she sits mentally in terms of where she belongs and how committed is she to sticking this out and not being tempted to go back. I think there's that sequence when she's on the Borg ship with the Borg Queen and they're assimilating that society, and it's pretty scary. It's pretty
Big
creepy
time.
stuff where you're
Yeah.
you're watching these things that you always hear the Borg are doing, that they go to these planets and they totally just go to town and they just assimilate entire societies. And we kind of get a taste of that here, and it's not pleasant. The sound design's really great. Stuff that's implied that you're not seeing, but you can hear happening. A lot of good filmmaking there. It's big action, in the way Voyager really, it becomes very much a staple of that show. It's an action adventure show, and the resolution's exciting, and but it's also poignant. Like it walks that line, being big, exciting science fiction, action, adventure stuff, but it's got an emotional tug to it as well, with the bond that Janeway and Seven have kind of formed in this relationship up to this point, and how the crew feels about Seven, how Seven feels about the crew, and how she feels about the Borg, and how she feels about her parents. Like, it really does dive deep into the Annika Hansen and Seven stuff. So it feels heavy and important.
Yeah, this is like a very important Seven kind of episode to kind of establish her character. It's like a character analysis almost, or origin story, or however you want to put it. It's got some good stuff in it for sure.
Yeah, a year and a half into her journey on the ship, it kind of forces her and forces us to kind of take stock of where she is and like how she feels about her situation. It doesn't like let the fact that she is where she is for all the reasons she's there off the hook as like a, hey, no real consequence to this. Like it forces there to be discussions about how she feels about what's going on.
Yeah,
and I think that's important.
Agreed.
Round 8, 3 more.
Yes. So, my next pick might surprise some people, but I think with the recency again, with maybe past tense, I'm gonna go with Deep Space Nine's the Maquis.
Maquis.
Yes, I think.
It's Cal Herb was in the chat a little while back, advocating heavily for someone to pick the Maquis.
One of the biggest why I like this episode, or run of episodes, I guess 2-parter, is that at the beginning of the show, you see the arc here. At the beginning of the show, Sisko does not want to be at this post. He's not sure if he wants to be in Starfleet anymore. It's all these things, and now we get fast forward to this episode. He sees someone who has definitely lost their path. Is one of his friends. He talks about duty in this. There's some really good stuff. So I think when you pair that with just his arc, this is one of those pillars of the Sisko arc where you can see the change a little bit, at least start to happen, where he's big on duty and just true to his kind of coming to the character of the Sisko we know. And it also kind of builds on the premise of the show where the Cardassians is a mess, that whole thing. Not just with the Bajorans, but also this Federation
settlers
and
civilian
playing with territory lines and demilitarized zones and things like that. Good times, I think. So I had to pick it.
Yeah, the Maquis is definitely another one of those examples that really sets into motion huge things. It sets up Voyager. It sets up things that are going to play out in TNG. Like, this is, we talk about the way I'm rewatching with kind of overlapping shows, and that's in the season where you have the Maquis, and then a few episodes later in the overlapping way to watch, you have like Journey's End, which is about those settlers. Yeah. And Wesley Crusher and the Native Americans who are living out on a colony someplace that's affected by this decision in the Maquis. A preemptive strike with Ensign Rowe, Lieutenant Rowe at that point, also deciding to go off of the Maquis and dealing also more like TNG's dealing with the aftermath of some of the stuff that's happening in the Maquis too. And then you get Caretaker and all the Voyager stuff too. So it sets into motion things that affect like all the stuff. Like you have this Venn diagram of TNG and Voyager and Deep Space Nine, and in the middle is the Maquis, really, at the end of the day. Like, that's the thing that sparks the things that touch all these shows and characters. cross-pollinates everything.
A lot of connective tissue, not just to Deep Space Nine, but to the universe itself and the other shows.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and I think on its own, everything you said about Sisko and his arc, I think that all works too. I think it works on its own. It's not just playing with the toys of the Star Trek universe. It's taking advantage of like Sisko and characters that are at home in Deep Space Nine, and it's not losing sight of its own show. And, taking advantage of the stuff that Deep Space Nine gets to play with. Yeah. So, So, this is getting tough. I'm really
really
here.
tough.
Like I said, there are a lot that I really like. There are two-parters that I really respect and I really enjoy. There's still an example sitting there that I love part 1. I'm not as huge on part 2. There's another example that I really like part 2, but I'm not as huge on part 1. So it's just a matter of like, where do you go? What feels right? I'm gonna go with the TNG. Maybe this is another example of like recency. I really like Gambit. Gambit's another one that feels rompy and fun and crazy, and it feels like TNG trying to do something different, taking our characters and putting them all in like these different situations. Riker and Picard having to sort of play act and try to one-up each other and are at odds in a way that they are never at odds. Riker hits Picard, punches him in the face at one point, which is a really strange thing to see, just the way that you know those characters and the way that they interact with each other. You have Data in command, and I mentioned last week, I think, when we were doing a rewatch recap, it's one of my favorite little Brent Spiner performances when he's playing Captain and like turns on like a little subroutine or something, and you can see in his performance that something clicks, and he's like taking stock of like these different things that Picard and I'm sure every other commanding officer he's ever had have done. Things with his body language, the way he sits, the way he folds his arms, the way he changes his cadence when he's talking to Worf.
Yeah.
I love that stuff. Love it. I love the way Worf reacts and has to check himself and calls into question his, the way he looks at Data and how he maybe isn't ready to be a first officer yet. To learn the difference between being the tactical officer who can always kind of like throw out their crazy suggestion, and how that's different than being the first officer where you can't just question everything the captain's doing. So I think there's a lot of really good stuff in Gambit. It's not, again, nearly as huge and important and as groundbreaking as some of these other ones that have already been picked, including the one I just picked with Dark Frontier, which I feel like is more impactful of a character and of a show. Gambit feels more of like an interesting aside and a fun time, but I love it every time I watch it. I really enjoy it.
Such a fun time. Like, we get characters dressing up in different, they're not in their usual uniforms. It's kind of fun in that way. Covert things, and I guess it kicks off with, I think was right Picard dies or something. The crew thinks that
Picard's dead.
Yeah. So that's kind of a big kind of get your attention moment a little bit.
For sure.
So that's all good stuff.
Yeah. Round 9.
So I'm gonna go with an episode. I think Bill kind of hit it on the nail on the head. That maybe I have a better time with the first half, and we just hit it actually. So I'm gonna go with Time's Arrow from TNG, which I'm just saying. I'm just seeing that I didn't put the little TNG tag on there. On that episode, but that'll try not to bug me. We talked about this a couple weeks ago as maybe an undervalued Trek. It's definitely an underrated time. I do like kind of the first half, exploring what it means. I guess part of humanity of death with Data, and I think. Again, this is another rising stock pick for sure, because what we see in Picard later on, it definitely changes that a little bit too, and adds a little bit of different flavor to it as I see it. So, had to pick it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, I really like Time's Arrow, as we talked about. I'm glad that it got chosen on the heels of really diving into it a couple of weeks ago. It's a fun time. I talked about, it reminds me a lot of the original series. It feels like it's taking chances with things that they're doing with characters, and dealing with Mark Twain, and really just kind of embracing the crazy, and just kind of going for it. But also rising stock, like you said, with some of the things that Picard brought to the front again, with Data's arc and where Data wants to go and how he sees himself. So definitely glad it got chosen. So round 9 for me. I think for me the best episode that's left is going to be another Voyager. Voyager did well today. Yes. I like Flesh and Blood. I like what that does for the Doctor. It's another exploration of like holographic rights, and there's some fallout from the Killing Game with giving the Corrosion holographic technology and what that would lead to, the sort of unforeseen consequences of a decision like that. Something that the crew does that feels good and feels like a positive solution ends up being a bad choice with hindsight. And it's exciting. I think there's a lot of good. There's some really rich dramatic stuff for Robert Picardo to play with being conflicted and trying to walk the fine line between. I don't think he's never compelled to betray the crew. He's not trying to betray the crew, but he's trying to bring those holograms back and trying to find a way for everybody to coexist and for things to get to a better place. Mm-hmm. And that feels at home with his character arc and feels right. His commitment to that feels like something that's been earned over the course of the show by that point in the 7th season. So that's a big one. It's not like a top of the line, top tier, absolute favorite of mine, but that's another one, kind of like work when I hit it late in Voyager's run. It always hits me, and I'm like, man, that's better than I remember. Mm-hmm. And it's good. I think when I'm looking at this list, that's the one that stands out to me as like, yeah, that's probably for me subjectively, the best complete package that's left on the board.
Yeah. Okay.
Round 10.
Last round. Whew. Man, this is tough. I'm gonna be bold here. Okay. I think I'm gonna go with The Hope Is You from Discovery.
Oh, okay.
Which is hard because it's not traditionally a two-parter, like we said, kind of at the top of the show. But I really have a higher regard, maybe, with these. It's so hard to even talk about with these. Maybe part 1 than maybe most, for sure. I think that those last, whatever it is, 5-7 minutes. On that outpost are so good. And when I think back,
yeah, you really love that.
When I think back, and I've had some time away from the third season of Discovery. When I think back, that's one of those most memorable scenes for me. So I feel like I had to pick it. The second part is good too as well. We get some good payoff. To a lot of different things, obviously, in the season. So, yeah. Picking it.
I love it. Interesting. And I like to see something from the new age come off the board. I was questioning there if it would happen.
Yeah.
I might even go back to the well here in a second.
Okay.
Really torn.
Yeah.
With that. There's a couple here. Full disclosure, now that I'm not, there's nothing else to pick after me here. But I've really had a hard time with sort of imbalanced for me parts 1 and 2. I
Big
really
time.
like.
Big time.
I love part 1 of Shockwave. Love. I think it's an Enterprise highlight. The consequences of that situation, seeing them have to second guess, should we even be out here? I think that's right at home in the arc of Enterprise in that first season, and the premise of that show, like forcing themselves out there and being pushed back by the Vulcans, and then they have this huge disaster happen that makes them second guess for the Vulcans. Right? Should we not be out here? We're not ready for this.
Yeah.
And then it ties into the Temporal War. Like, they set up a lot of big things. Got a great cliffhanger with Archer being pulled all the way to the future, and this, apocalyptic, everything got effed up, like the future, and having to figure a way out of that. Like, it feels like a real cliffhanger, like a real, like, wow, like, what are they going to do?
Because this is the end of the first season, right? Into the second season. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And part 2, I think, is okay, but it doesn't have the juice that part 1 has. So I've stayed away from that. Same kind of thing with the Search. I think the Search part 1 is really strong with the introduction of the Defiant and going over to the Gamma Quadrant and having that huge battle with the Dominion, and that cliffhanger at the end of that episode with the Changelings coming out of the lake of Changelings. I think part 2 is a little less successful with the twist of it's all simulation. I think that's kind of not my favorite thing, and I think it's not quite as lively and exciting as part 1 is. Birthright's kind of the same thing. I really like part 1 with the exploration of the dream stuff with Beta and Worf not, questioning his father and all the things he's assumed are true. Part 2 is a whole different thing with him on the colony with the Romulans and the Klingons living together. So there's these imbalanced ones where I maybe love one half, but maybe not as much another. And then there are other examples here where I feel like I like both parts and they're on equal footing. I feel more at home with, like, no, these are 2 equal parts here. I'm gonna go with Discovery. I'm gonna go with Terra Firma.
I'm so glad you picked that.
I want to throw some love its way. I still feel like there's stuff in that. I'm not completely at home in deciding on where it sits on my, like, Discovery ranks as a whole. I'm curious to watch it all over again and have that feel more final, like with another round of watching it, having it settle into my head. But shocking things like the Giorgio stepping through the door and finding out where she is, like seeing where she is. Like, to me, that I mentioned when we talked about it in the first setting, was a rare moment where my kind of breath was taken away. Like, I can't believe they're doing this. Like, I had no idea they were doing this. That really worked. The Guardian Forever stuff is great, I think. And it's a classic Star Trek, like we talked about on the core setting not too long ago, like having that chance to undo or to change something you did in earlier life. Like that's a relatable and real wish that a lot of us have had, and seeing somebody as crazy as Giorgio have to go through that is interesting. Yeah. So I'm feeling good about doing that. I'm glad to.
This might be one of my biggest draft regrets, is not picking that. You guys know that I'm not big on the Mirror Universe stuff, obviously, but I think there's some really good stuff in the first half of this when you pair it with specifically the relationship between Giorgio and Burnham, and the with the pilot as well, and when you pair that stuff, such just good stuff. And then the second half, it feels cutthroat again. I think it feels dark and just bad, and it also it because I feel like another thing that I really like about this episode is I feel like in past iterations of the Mirror Universe, we've always tried to change that cutthroat mentality, that, how in Deep Space Nine there's all this rebellion talk and things like that, and there's pushback to this cutthroat way of life, and they do that here again. But I think it's the Mirror Universe pushing back, like, we're not going to change, even though it's good. I think it's one of my. I think we should maybe bridge the gap into what would the next pick be? What were some tough cuts? And this for me might be one of the top 3 toughest cuts. So. Yeah.
For me, it's the ones that I kind of just named. I struggled. Shockwave's the one that is sticking out to me because I love part 1 so much. And even the Search. I do like the Search, even part 2. I respect the Search. I think that's a game changer for that show. And feels like a big deal. Such Food Sorrow is kind of the flip side of that. I enjoy part it's full of action and
Big time.
it's balls to the wall on that front. It's insane and crazy, and there's some really great stuff in part 2. I'm not as huge on part 1. I think part 1's a little plotting, a little more like okay,
Yeah.
like a lot of long dialogue scenes of kind of setting up what's coming. I think part 2 is much more successful than part 1. But even Descent, I really like part 1 of Descent. We talked about that not too long ago. With, Data's experiencing emotion with the Data spotlight last week. I think we talked about that. So a lot of them were tough cuts. What's your least favorite on the list? Is there one that sticks out to you that you know you wouldn't have picked? Like that was never in question. Never, you just weren't ever going to.
Unimatrix Zero. I know we got some people that do like it. I think it's a cool sci-fi concept. It's definitely Voyager in its when you break it down, really. But I think it's going back to the well maybe one too many times with the Borg stuff. And part of me is this might be like very, I guess, savage and direct, but I don't really care about the people in Unimatrix Zero, and I don't really, the characters, I don't really care for, but right. I know people do like it, so I don't want to drag it through too much here.
AKA Mamel likes Unimatrix Zero, is talking about that.
Cool.
She mentioned that half of her top 10 was not chosen, which I love.
That's so cool. Great. That's so cool.
That's the reason to do these things.
Yeah.
That's my whole reason for loving this is that it exposes the difference in preference and what clicks for some people and not others. So I love to hear that. So she's mentioning Birthright. It was something that she chose. The Search, Unimatrix Zero, and I'm curious, AKA man, we'll keep going. I want to hear what those other two were that were on yours that we didn't choose.
Another tough pick was The Search. I really do like the first half of that with the Defiant and the collaboration with the Defiant and things like that. That's so cool. I think I wouldn't even say the second part is where it falls. I think the twist at the end is the reason why it was left off my list. So.
Right. Yeah. And the twist at the end kind of. It feels kind of a cheat, I guess. I think it makes sense that they would do that. Like I think it's a neat idea to like, okay, we're gonna test to see how they would react to Peace. But I also don't necessarily think it's consistent, and it's not a fault of the show. They were still finding their sea legs and finding what they were. Like, can't criticize them too much for kind of like with the Borg. There are things in Q-Who that don't necessarily like stay consistent with how we do the Borg later. Mm-hmm. Same thing in the I think that the way we see the Dominion much later in the show. That tactic, that decision,
they would not do
that didn't feel like something that they would do.
They wouldn't care.
I don't think they would either. I think they would have a different tactic. The way that the Dominion are portrayed through the majority of the rest of the show. So I don't love that. And that's definitely, if I had to explain, me too. I think if there's a reason it's not on my list. It's that. AKA Such Utsara Part 2, the first 20 minutes of that, she watches all the time. The battle scenes are so epic. It's not really about battles, but it's way too. It's fun. Like, yeah, I agree. I think if I remember thinking that at the time, Such Utsara just embraces like the balls to the wall action battle sequence so much.
Yeah. And
it just goes so far into it. It's just like, all right, we're just gonna do it. We're gonna like give you all the Star Trek battle stuff you ever wanted to see here. And I do appreciate that. I really enjoy Part 2. It's crazy and it's not for everybody. I think some people find it to be a little too thick on that, but I do respect that. And I think Anson Mount's really great in it. And she also picked it at Incardia Ego.
Wow. Okay.
The card. That's the other one. So, and that's another one for me that I think Part 2 is pretty strong. I really like Part 2. I love the ending of it. I love where it ends up. Part 1 I'm not as into, but I really respect that, and if there were another couple rounds, I could definitely see myself picking it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think for least favorite for me, I'd probably go Stormfront for myself.
Okay.
I know a lot of people really like that. That's another one that's kind of like your mileage may vary. It's definitely rompy and silly and ridiculous, and they just kind of throw caution to the wind and embrace the crazy. And it's some people love it, some people don't. I'm kind of more in the camp of kind of left cold by it. I love the last 20 minutes or so of it, the resolution, the return to Earth proper, and those last 5 minutes or so are really, really good. I think. But yeah, interesting. So real quick, 6 out of 8 TNG episodes were picked. Okay. 8 out of 10 Voyager episodes were picked. So a lot of success there. There were 10 Voyager, 8 TNG on board, and a majority of both of them went. 2 out of 3 Deep Space Nine, 1 out of 3 Enterprise, 2 out of 3 Discovery, and 1 out of 1 TOS. So a lot of success for DS9 and Voyager, with a lot to choose from. Like those batches of episodes got pretty well scooped up.
I just looked at the time. We're definitely going a little long, so maybe we'll skip the Trek.
We'll hit that next week for sure. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun. I love these episodes. I love doing fantasy drafts. They're quickly. I think I say this every time we do it. I think it's my favorite thing to be honest, in terms of like our recurring topics. I think it forces me to think of the episodes in a different way. I love it's not just straight up a top 5 list or a top 10 list. There's a whole different layer to it. Yeah. And I'm excited to look at different ways to do it outside of just. I love the episodes in a season. I think that's a really cool way to sum up a season.
Yeah.
I'd kind of even like to do that when you're done season 3 of Deep Space Nine again. We did it for season 1. We didn't do it for season 2, but every once in a while when we finish the season, I'd kind of like to try it.
Yeah.
Just because I think it's a cool way to kind of sum it up.
Yeah. I love it because we get to talk about more episodes. We get to talk about more Trek. Yeah. Because absolutely. A lot of times with top 5 or top 10, we're talking about a smaller handful of episodes. But here we're talking about such a big group, such a wide range of episodes that it's good. So I'm glad we did.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. So I guess that'll about do it for us this week. We'll be back next week for more Trek Live. We're going to talk about single episodes that we think would make good 2-parters.
Yeah. Yep.
Right?
Yeah. This is kind of the 2-parter kind of run here.
Yeah. We're going to look at episodes that might have benefited from a little more time, a little more fleshing out that part 1, part 2 format. And I look forward to kind of thinking about that this week and coming with episodes in mind and seeing where we stand. So everyone out there is welcome to join us for these live streams on YouTube and on Periscope and Twitter, where you can kind of share your ideas. This week it was kind of hard to keep up with the chat, so I appreciate you guys who are there hanging with us. It's Calherb and aka Manuel. Both of us are producing on one side or the other. Dan's doing the YouTube side, I'm doing the Periscope side. So it's a lot to keep up with, but I appreciate you guys contributing, and we tried to hang with you as best we could as far as commenting on your responses. But next week will be a more traditional conversation, so we definitely look forward to hearing from anybody out there who would like to attend and be a part of the conversation. So,
but definitely come over to Twitter and let us know your guys' list. We want to definitely see those for sure.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see what people think of our draft board and maybe who got the better batch of episodes in their minds and continued conversation on those fronts. So join our conversation on Discord by DMing me on Twitter at TrekFan4387. If you're interested in getting aboard, we have a Discord server where we talk about what we're watching. We talk about what we're reading. There's a channel in there if you're reading novels and want to share your thoughts. It's a great way to connect with people. Every so often we have what we call Trek After Dark, which is a casual, laid-back, unbroadcasted sort of group call where people can participate on camera, on just microphone, or just chatting along in text, typing, with people hanging out, sometimes watching Star Trek, sometimes just casually talking about Star Trek, sometimes not talking about Star Trek at all, and just kind of getting to know each other about what we have going on in our lives. But it's a nice little tight-knit community. We do it. We're going to try to do it in 2021 about every 6 weeks, 8 weeks, every month and a half, 2 months. So if you're interested in connecting with other Star Trek fans on that level, send me a DM. I'll get you invited. I'll get you set up, and that'll be like an automatic invite to those kinds of events. And then, of course, find us on Twitter for all kinds of other Star Trek content and conversations.
Yep. You guys know the drill. The discussion doesn't have to stop here. If you're listening to this on your podcast feed, we thank you. But this episode specifically probably benefits from coming over to either the Periscope link or the YouTube, because there are some producery stuff where you can some visuals and see the draft board and things like that. But Twitter, Facebook, you guys know the drill. The discussion doesn't have to stop here. See you guys next week.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time and hanging out. And see you next week.